In Chapter 6 in Dettmer, we're talking about the organization and management of the kinds of meetings that we have at school all of the time. And I think, again, we fall into a certain process. They become very informal. Certain people are just expected to carry on certain roles. And sometimes it's worth a look back at, are we really doing this in the best manner for ourselves and for our students? The chapter starts off really kind of emphasizing why it's so important to be able to engage in really meaningful collaboration and consultation. And one of the primary reasons is it's so necessary for us to have that kind of support ourselves in order to fend off a lot of the traps that we can fall into as teachers. Everyone knows the national statistics on the attrition of teachers. We lose some of the best and brightest very early on. And if we don't lose some of our best and brightest early on, they can also fall into real kinds of states of burnout that really have a negative effect on us and on our students. And so, when you see a teacher who's lost their patience, you know that there's some level of emotional exhaustion. When you teach, as you all know, no matter what's happening in your personal life, what your day is like, how you feel, it's almost as though you have to, the show must go on and you have to be the actor or actress who performs for your students and teaches them and, keeps your own issues at bay and does what your students need. And that can be exhausting at times for certain. It's also very hard at times not to look at the problems and say, I can't do anything about this. I'm not making a difference. And that sometimes leads to blaming students or families. And sometimes we see educators fall into a pattern of looking to those folks first as the root of the problem. And so these are understandable traps to fall into. But the point the author is trying to make is we know that these are natural things that can happen. And one of the best ways to keep them at bay is to have the support that collaboration and consultation could provide for us. Time management is maybe one of the greatest issues that you might struggle with in your job. You have the skills to teach your students, you know how to do it, you know what to teach, and how to reach them. How many times is there just not enough time in the day to do everything you'd like to do or want to do or need to do for the students? And so, how many occupations are there where you can't take a phone call when you need to and have a moment to kind of catch your breath? And teaching is certainly that way. And it can vary. I think very often teachers in earlier grades have even more time constraints because there's very little time without students, whereas sometimes in the secondary level, teachers might have more of a break, even a break between classes or a planning period or whatever that we rarely see in the early grades. So given our knowledge that our time is so valuable and so limited, and the difficulty it causes for us when we feel this terrible strain of I don't have time to do the job I want to do, it becomes important to really try to manage it. And I speak about this, frankly, as a hypocrite, because I don't manage my own time very well often. So really looking at how am I using my time now? Am I doing things in the level of their priority? That's a tricky thing because sometimes you don't have the choice to do them in your level of priority, because often things are put upon you that you didn't plan. So trying your best to allocate your time and use time management. Easier said than done. I'm the first to admit that. I do think, though, that we could be more efficient in our meetings, and I know I feel that way in my own situation as well. There's nothing that sucks our time away more than a meeting that doesn't accomplish anything, and you can have so many meetings. That's all that you seem to spend your time outside of the classroom doing, and if they don't result in something meaningful, then it's even more frustrating. And I think the key, and I think everyone knows the key to an efficient meeting is probably planning ahead of time. There's a great checklist that's probably more exhaustive than any of us would need it to be on page 163, it's figure 6.4. But we might, if we were able to plan ahead more, make our meetings more efficient from the get-go. And I think because often we are the people, the special educators, school psychologists in the school, who's often kind of meant to be the organizer and the facilitator of a lot of the meetings that we talk about with regard to students with special needs. We might be able to have more control over this if we do plan ahead. It's a tricky balance not to have people feel as though they're not being able to participate as they'd like to, being rushed, but not wasting everyone's time. So it's a real skill to facilitate an efficient meeting, but it can become the way meetings are done. So one of the key things is to make sure you have the right people there, and I use right in quotes, meaning the people who really need to be given the agenda for the meeting, what the topic is. And to even have an agenda, no matter how simple, I think we all know is helpful in keeping people on track. And I love to sit in a meeting and check off the things on the agenda as they go by when I feel like I'm under a real time crunch. Having the right setting for meetings, not having a meeting in the kindergarten room where all the adults are sitting a foot off the floor, that kind of thing, is also important, and having a setting where everybody can participate without difficulty. And then making sure that everyone who's there, because you've been careful to have the needed people there, know what their responsibilities are and kind of keep them accountable and keep a track of time. I know, and this is probably your experience too with IEP meetings after school, there is a time constraint. I was always, if I was facilitating the meeting, watching the clock, because I knew when it was time for teachers to leave, teachers would leave. And so we really needed to be on task, get their information, not allow things to go off track, because then it would be too late to have their input. Often we forget to introduce people. If we're a group that meets regularly and we have just one or two new folks, it's important that everybody knows who is there and why they're there. And then certainly wrap up what we've accomplished and what that means to the participant responsibilities, and leave feeling like this wasn't a waste of my time. This was time well spent in an effort to meet the needs of one of our students. Interviews are tricky, and I'm asking you guys to do interviews in this class, but we as educators typically love to share what we do and how we think it's going, so that it's not normally a problem for us, but interviewing some folks may make them uncomfortable. So when we do an interview to gather data that we need in order to collaborate or consult on a student, we need to make sure that that's the best way to get that information. For certain, some folks would be more comfortable, filling out a little questionnaire or whatever, but if an interview is the way to go, then we have to really kick in our best communication skills, not use any of our educational lingo that we use so regularly all the time that we start to think everyone understands what we're talking about. Making sure we're really asking the questions we need answers to, and having a real demeanor of, I'm asking this because you know the answer to it and I don't. It's not a threatening situation. It's not a why don't you do this or that. It's a cooperative kind of interview. It is important to take notes, because very often just something small you could forget about until it's too late or whatever, and you want to know basically that you're being accurate with your notes. So it's often appropriate, if you do take notes, to then show them to the person you've interviewed and ask them, have I gotten this right? Have I captured your intent in your responses? And only use them again when that's the best way to go, because they are time consuming and they can feel a little intrusive sometimes if they're not really necessary. Other information in your chapter regards observations, and I know that you've had observations, you've probably done many, and that's been covered in other classes. We talk a lot about observation of students with ASD, in an assessment course. So an observation is a wonderful assessment tool. It takes some skill in knowing what you need to observe in a really defined way and how to record that information in a meaningful way, but they can certainly provide great information. Consultation records are helpful, I think, to remind me where am I in this process. So if I'm interacting with someone in a consultative fashion, where did things get left? Again, our time constraints and our crazy schedules can lead us to think, oh, I told them that, but maybe I didn't. So I often need to go back and say, wait a minute, who responded last? Did I answer the last questions? Are they still waiting to hear from me? That could be my age and memory issues, but it's helpful. Data keeping for accountability, though, I think is important for teachers, because with regard to special education, we are under, time constraints that are legally bound. And so it's so important to keep things moving along and keeping dates clear. So with regard to IEP development, that kind of thing, we have to be aware of where we are in the process. And so it's just helpful, and it's kind of a self-protection to keep track of what's been done last and what needs to happen next. The use of technology is super helpful in regard to conducting IEP meetings or consultative meetings. Even scheduling the meetings through technology is much easier. Taking notes is obviously much easier during the meeting. But one of the things to remember is once it's gone into the computer, where is it going to stay? So the ethical issues fall into play here as well, and you've seen those ethical points after each chapter. But here it's a question of what's saved on my computer, what's been emailed out, was it appropriate, did it go to the appropriate people? Technology can get us into ethical difficulty, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So keeping an eye on using this great tool, but recognizing that new confidentiality issues can come to play through our use of technology.